It can feel like we're on the edge of a cliff. And just one more unexpected expense, a trip to the ER, a flat tire, or one more layoff at work can push us into the abyss. This is the reality for working people in California. No matter how hard we work to give ourselves and our families a dignified life, it could all be taken away in an instant. But it doesn't have to be like this. California is a $4 trillion economy, the fourth largest economy in the world. But rather than use that wealth to provide housing and health care and a dignified life for all of us, the politicians tell us we're in a budget crisis. But we know the truth. We know there's enough money to meet all of our needs. Our vision is a socialist vision of California, which puts the needs of working people before the profits of billionaires. I'm Ramsey Robinson, and I'm running for governor of California because it's time the people of California build a California for us, not the billionaires. As a community organizer and a mental health social worker in Bayview, one of the last black and brown communities in San Francisco, I've seen, against all odds, how the working class adapts and survives. But we shouldn't have to scrape by. California has 186 billionaires, but 39 million of us. We're the ones that generate the wealth. The people of California should be calling the shots. We're sick and tired of both the Democrats and the Republicans who defend the corporations and the billionaires while we face poverty and eviction and displacement.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Gimme a Break, the podcast of the Just Break Already caucus in the DSA. I'm your host, Lital, along with Edward.
Hello.
And as you can probably guess from our name, we fight for a clean break of the DSA from the Democratic Party as the necessary precondition to having a socialist party in this country. If you want to learn more about our purpose, you can read our material in our linktree, which will be posted in the show notes. The audio you heard at the beginning is from the campaign of Ramsey Robinson. He's running for governor of California on the Peace and Freedom Party ticket as a socialist. He's part of the Party for Socialism and Liberation's statewide Vote Socialist slate, and he's running against the Democrats and Republicans and capitalism. This campaign is one of the working class electoral campaigns the JBA is supporting around the country, and it's the focus of this episode. The election is coming up very soon on June 2nd, and that's why we wanted to do this first. But we will do future episodes on other independent working class alternatives that we are supporting in the midterms, like Shama Sawant in Seattle, Ed Hershey in Chicago, Andre Easton in the Bronx, and Brittany Kubacek in Providence, Rhode Island. So today we have a special guest, Max, who is in the Bay Area in California and with the JBA, who have been canvassing for the Vote Socialist slate and fighting to get the California DSA to endorse the Vote Socialist slate. So welcome, Max.
Hi, thanks for having me.
The JBA put forward a resolution to endorse this working class alternative, the Vote Socialist slate. And so maybe you can start by explaining what the resolution said. I think you tried to put it forward at the East Bay DSA general meeting. So maybe you could just give some punchlines about what the resolution was about, and then also what the reaction was to it at the meeting from others there.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to back up a little bit to the context, which is the race itself and why we felt it was important to put forward this resolution at all. So there's this primary coming up on June 2nd, just days away. And it's been a real headache for the left and liberals in California because there's this huge field. Newsom is termed out, he can't run again. He's obviously got his eye on the presidency. And so there's this huge field of candidates. There's like 61 candidates for governor. There's at least like 10 Democrats running, and they're all like really gross in their own way. Like the front runner right now is Becerra, who's the former Attorney General of California. He was a Secretary of Health and Human Services under Biden during COVID, so involved in all the lockdowns and the attacks on the working class. In that regard, he's a former LA congressman, so like career politician, really reflects liberal Democratic Party rule in California. You have Matt Mahan, he's the mayor of San Jose, and then you have Katie Porter, likes to depict herself as this like firebrand in Congress. And then you have like Tom Steyer, this billionaire who's somehow carved out his lane as like the most progressive talking one of them. And so people are really like, they don't want to pay attention to this. This is like a real headache. There's no good choices. The working class is like really checked out of all of this. And And there is this slate of candidates who are running. They've been campaigning for a long time. They've been campaigning for months. You see them at demonstrations. If you go to a Palestine demonstration or a Defend Venezuela protest, they're there pushing their campaign as a way to build support for socialism and for socialist politics as they see them, and to build a party of the working class. And so, we saw this as an opportunity where you have this crowded field of, these Democrats that nobody likes. The Democratic Party is very unpopular, even in, deep, deep blue California, to actually reject all of this, lesser evilism stuff and draw a line against the capitalist parties, and put forward a working class alternative as a poll in this election, as a way to gather the forces of the working class and the left around a new approach and a new way forward. The other thing that's really key is that in this primary, California has this weird thing, it's relatively recent, where they have what you call an open primary, where it's not based on your party affiliation. Anybody from any party can run in this primary that's totally run by the state government, not by the parties themselves. And then whoever the top two vote getters from that primary, they're the only candidates that get to go on to November. So in November, you're not even allowed to write in a candidate that's
Wow.
not one of the two candidates that passes this.
So that's why like June 2nd is it for these independent or alternate candidates like Ramsey. If he doesn't get into this too, it's over.
That's right. Yeah, this is like a really key date. So this is the one to really focus on and get people out and build support for. And that's not just for the governor's slot. That's for all of these statewide offices. They're all subjected to this really restricted, incredibly undemocratic primary process, which is really designed to weed out third-party candidates and progressive candidates and ensure that the duopoly persists. And you see it, it's really like this fear-mongering that, you can't vote for Robinson, you can't vote for a third party, you can't vote for a socialist because there's only two spots, and then we could end up with like two Republicans, and then we'd be forced to choose between one or another Republican, which is actually a very real possibility, especially this year when the Republicans are actually polling pretty high. The top 5 candidates in the polls right now, 2 of them are Republican. They're counting on the fact that like people don't pay as much attention to primaries in general.
Right.
So it's a lot more likely that the people that have the backing of the big party machines are going to be the only ones that make it through. And then your choices are even more restricted. And like we say in the resolution, our purpose is to use elections to raise class consciousness and propagandize for socialism. So that's why we think it's really important to get a strong response, get a strong vote for these candidates to actually send a message out there and kind of be like a rallying cry to other people. If there's a really strong result for this slate, then that would actually be a signal that would show to people, hey, like maybe there's actually more support for working class politics, for rejecting the capitalist parties than I thought before. And you can use that as a kind of foundation to build from and go from there.
Yeah. So you were saying that's in your resolution?
Yeah, that's in the resolution. It lays out, and you can find the resolution on the linktree, the DSA Just Break Already social media. So we talk about, why do socialists use elections? We don't think that it's possible to get into office and reform the state from the top or from within, but it's to propagandize for socialism. And the Democrats and Republicans, they're both parties of the oppressors, of the exploiters. And U.S. imperialism, Trump is waging war on all fronts, domestically and internationally. He just bombed another couple boats in the Pacific, killing more people while he's also bombing Iran, while Cuba is being strangled, while Venezuela is like basically been turned into a colony. And this is all has a lot of bipartisan support. The Democrats are making grumbles about the legality or the process by which it took place, but they're not doing anything to stop it. They're actually complicit in this. And I think a lot of people are really disgusted with that and really looking for a way out. And this presents a chance to do that. The second whereas talk about how the left is really small and fractured and is very disconnected from the working class. It's also very sectarian. A lot of these groups that have a lot in common really should be working together to try and build socialism and try and make a connection with the working class and divide society along class lines and debate the way forward from within a kind of common front. And this is an opportunity to actually do that by giving critical support to the Vote Socialist slate. The DSA could actually work toward a greater left unity around some just like basic standards, right, of like rejecting capitalist parties and move on from there about debating which way forward. And also like to do the opposite, to continue to tie itself to the Democratic Party and recommend Democrats, endorse Democrats, run Democrats, is just increasing the image of socialists as just being part of the system,
Hates,
just being another version of liberal, which the working class is really disgusted by and really turning away from. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask about that because I saw on Instagram some California DSA post about the elections. Like what they're recommending people vote for Steyer. And what was the language? It was something like time will tell if he is a class traitor or something like that, which is, not a ringing endorsement, I guess. Question mark. Oh, it's absurd. A socialist organization endorsing a billionaire.
Yeah. They tried to like word it very carefully. And the people who defend this position really defend it with these very like lawyeristic arguments. Like, well, we didn't actually endorse anybody and we didn't even actually recommend him. We just said that he's the only real choice and that it would be a betrayal if you lodged a protest vote. And if you lodge a protest vote, you hate the working class and black people. Like, it was like, is real very clear political blackmail that they used, and they left people to like supposedly draw their own conclusion. It was very obvious what they were doing.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, is that like the DSA Right in defending this decision is trying to say, well, we didn't actually endorse him and we didn't do this or that and blah, blah, blah. And the other people who are outraged by this decision are saying, but nobody cares about that. Like everybody reading this voter guide understands what you're doing. Like any worker. And that's what anybody is going to come away from this. And if you try and like wiggle out of it using these kind of like lawyeristic arguments, you just come off looking even more slimy and untrustworthy to any like serious leftist. Or
you mentioned there that some people are outraged about like the Steyer stuff, but I was kind of curious. You introduced this resolution, East Bay. Is any of the outrage on the ground there? What kind of response did you get about this resolution?
Yes, we tried to introduce it in a few different ways. So the first step we did was we went to the Electoral Committee, as you're supposed to do, and we put forward a kind of much shortened version of this, like a kind of initial draft. And that was on April 23rd. So well before the Steyer thing happened. Like we knew we wanted to draw the class line in these elections and actually put forward a working class alternative before the Steyer thing blew up. And, the responses that we got were from the people who are on the Electoral Committee, right? So they're like kind of the most like right wing of the East Bay DSA. The most committed to like electoral politics. And so they obviously rejected it. And they used some pretty ridiculous arguments like that I've heard before from the DSA Right. One was that the Democratic Party isn't really a party. It's just this like fundraising apparatus because it doesn't actually have a program. And you can say whatever you want within the Democratic Party because there's actually no like disciplinary process. So there's nothing unprincipled about being with it because it's not even really a party. It doesn't even really exist. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, this is like the oldest political party in America, literally.
In the world, I think.
Right?
Yeah.
And like, so, yeah, it's just kind of these like, all sorts of rationalizations for why it's okay to operate within them. Because that was the line of our demarcation. That was our intervention. Was we should be supporting these candidates and not the Democratic Party candidates who are the party of the class enemy. And we got a very strong backlash from that. And so then, we figured, well, that didn't work, which is fine. It was kind of more of an information gathering exercise anyway. We didn't really expect the Electoral Committee to go for it. So then we sent it to the steering committee on May 4th, again, before the California voter guide came out, to get considered at the May 17th general meeting. And they sat on it for like a week and didn't get back. We had to like prod them to say like, hey, what's going on with our resolution? You didn't respond to us. You haven't put it on the agenda. And they said, the agenda is very packed, but we didn't have time for it. But you're welcome to put forward a motion to amend the agenda at the general meeting if you want to. So we said, okay, fine, great. That's our opening. We'll take it. So we printed out the resolution and we went to the meeting and we handed it out. It was a very useful tool to like just generate conversations with people. So I was going up and saying like, hey, are you for a clean break or a dirty break? And we're looking for a few good clean breakers around here. And that kind of got people's interest and got them to at least read what I had. And, it's interesting. This happens to me at a lot of DSA events. Everybody pans the Democratic Party. Oh, yes, they're capitalists. Oh, yes, they're the party of genocide. Oh, yes, it's really terrible. And we shouldn't be associated with them. It's really bad. But, XYZ, right? The rationalization depends on who you're talking to, like where they fall on the spectrum of the DSA right or left. So the more right-wing kind of DSA argument is like harm reduction, right? you have to vote for the least harmful candidate. And we, privileged people, we might be able to say it doesn't matter who gets elected, but if you're black or trans or something like that, then this stuff really matters, and you can't allow the possibility of a Republican to win because that would bring all this harm down on people. And it's
Forever.
like, no, like this system,
Yeah.
like California is run by the Democratic Party from top to bottom, and it's a horrible place to be black or trans or, anything. Like, it's like really very vicious and incredibly expensive. And furthermore, the struggles that are necessary to get us out of this situation, actually advance the struggle of any of these oppressed groups, are completely held back by their allegiance to the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
That's actually the main obstacle standing in the way of advancing any of these struggles. So, anyway, so it was an opening for discussion. We did find one person in particular who said that they had already voted for the Vote Socialist slate. They'd voted for Claudia and Karina back in 2024, which was actually our first intervention into the East Bay DSA as the JBA, was to try and push for the chapter to endorse the Claudia and Karina PSL presidential candidates. And vice presidential candidates. But yeah, it was like a similar thing where like individual members would say, well, I'm voting for these guys because I believe in socialism. And I think that, these lesser evil arguments and, political blackmail is really like wrong. And that's not what we should be doing. But I'm not going to make a stink about it. I'm not going to stand up and fight for this in the general meeting. This person we spoke to said like, well, the electoral committee, they know what they're doing. And so I'm just going to let them handle the endorsements. That's kind of like the truce within the DSA between the left and right. The right gets to decide what kind of the electoral strategy is and pursue all these like right-wing things and support all these liberals and capitalists and now a billionaire, right? And then the left gets to talk about Lenin and say that they're Marxists or Maoists or whatever, and we're really for revolution. But they don't try and like fight each other. But what happens is that the right just dominates. Like what people think of the DSA is the right wing of the DSA. What people see and know about the DSA is that they just endorsed a billionaire and that they're no different than the Democratic Party. They don't think, oh, this is like a revolutionary Marxist organization.
On like the biggest private contractor, for ICE. That's who this guy is. That's how he made all his money. And so it's just, it's such a like contradiction for everything that people in the DSA say they want, like to defend immigrants against ICE. And then your organization is literally telling people to vote for this guy who the DSA, California DSA said he was the most progressive of the current viable candidates. And yeah, you mentioned it earlier. Not only did they say basically to vote for him, they were very explicit. Don't vote for Robinson or for the Greens. Don't vote for any other, what do they call it? A protest vote. Don't do a protest. This one's too important. You should vote for the.
Yeah. I'm looking at it right now. We highly encourage voters not to cast a protest vote as the stakes are incredibly high and the chance of the top two candidates being both Republicans is very real. And that's just a literal Democratic Party talking point. It's completely
then it just seems
indistinguishable from anything that any of these other Democrats would say. And so like the Steyer thing, so that was actually, like I said, so we'd been building for this motion well before, but then when the CA DSA voter guide dropped on May 8th, there was a lot of anger about that online, and we were very certain that this would be an issue at the meeting. And it did turn out that, a lot of people were really grossed out by this and thought that it was a big mistake, but it really came down to like, we need better democratic procedures, or why didn't they just sit it out? Like they didn't have to say anything. They could have just stayed silent. We were the only ones there who were actually putting forward an alternative. Like, okay, here's something to do about it. And that was like my main motivation for trying to amend the agenda, was to say, look, the voter guide just said this, and this is what people think the DSA in California stands for. And if we don't, as a chapter, make a statement in opposition to that and actually put forward something different, then we have to own that too. That becomes our endorsement. And so we have to actually take a stand against this and draw a line to save the name of socialism, honestly, or do some damage control anyway. Against this. The only opposition that I've been able to find like publicly from within the DSA is the North Central Valley chapter did put out a statement on Instagram after the voter guide was published saying that they did not support the recommendation for Steyer and that they were not involved in that decision-making process. I was like, okay, fine. But like, what do you want to do instead? Yeah.
Right.
Like, where does that leave anybody? Because then it's like, okay, so now you're just telling people to choose between the former attorney general or the mayor of the Silicon Valley city that spits on the poor, or like what? Like, it's just, all these different charlatans. So we were the only ones actually putting forward an alternative and something positive to do about it that would actually be a step forward. And the other main motivation that I made, because I only had a very short time, I couldn't motivate the full thing as I would have if we'd actually gone to a real debate, was that there's a lot of people in the DSA who are really grossed out by this and actually do want to break with the Democratic Party and do see that as a necessity, but they just don't know where to start. It seems like this like huge insurmountable task. It seems like I'm new here, and these people who are veterans, they know better, and they're telling me we're not ready yet. So I guess that's true. And so we were putting this forward and saying, this is a concrete thing that we can do that will actually advance in that direction. It would actually draw a line and be a signal. And if you are someone who does think that there needs to be a break with the Democratic Party, then this is a way to take one small step down that path in that direction. Yeah, no. So it was not put to a vote. There was an attempt. We made an attempt to amend the agenda to get the resolution on the floor, and that failed. And it failed by 27 to 40. I thought the initial vote was 19. We actually got 27 votes to 40, which I thought was actually not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, not at all.
It's a good starting point and kind of gives a measure of the temperature. And who knows, out of those 27 people, how many would have actually voted for the final resolution. We might have won over more of the 40 if we'd had more time to actually go over it. And if the right wing had really exposed themselves in defending, the Steyer recommendation, that actually probably could have gone a very different way, which is certainly why they closed ranks to prevent it from being discussed at all. And you just like look at the slate. It's like they're mostly like union organizers. You got Frank Lara running for superintendent of schools. He's the executive vice president of the United Educators of San Francisco, the teachers union in San Francisco. Megan Adams, who's running for state controller, is the president of Smart 741, which represents school bus drivers in San Francisco and San Mateo. The guy's running for insurance commissioner, Lalo Vargas. He's a teacher in LA, member of the UTLA Teachers Union. And they all say that they're fighting for socialism. They say socialism is the answer to capitalism. They say that the working class needs to have its own political power and needs to have its own political party. I mean, this is like straightforward. Like any DSAer should be in support of that. It should not be this is not like a radical like thing, right? To draw this kind of line. But what is radical is to actually go against the lesser evil political blackmail. And that's what takes a real backbone, that none of these other left caucuses that claim to be fighting for the DSA to be its own party or whatever, they were not willing to
members of
stand
the
up
other
to that.
ones.
Right.
It's hard to tell because like people don't really identify themselves. It's like we know that there are members of the leadership who are in like Communist Caucus. There's members of leadership in the Socialist Majority Caucus, of course, and like Bread and Roses and stuff like that. But they don't like put out material, and nobody published anything about this. I was trying to find like a statement either about the voter guide or even before the voter guide, like any other caucus just saying anything about the California elections. And I couldn't find anything. I did find out that one of the leaders of the North Central Valley DSA branch, which is kind of interesting. Like they actually opposed Prop 50, which was very unique. Yeah, like so there's someone that I definitely want to reach out and talk to them. But one of their leaders, at least, who's like been active on the discussion boards, is a member of Red Star Caucus. And Red Star put out this whole thing about like socialist strategies and elections and how it's about organizing and blah, blah, blah. And of course, still defending using the Democratic Party ballot line and being within the Democratic Party. And they didn't even say anything about these California elections. So it's just like everybody's just been trying to avoid the question because it's very uncomfortable, because it's so clear that like if you're siding with the Democrats in this election, you're siding with the enemies of the working people. I mean, like I was listening to the governor's debate that was run by CNN, and their first question was like, okay, so Democrats on this stage, you've run the state top to bottom for the last 16 years, and it's the most expensive. It has the highest poverty rate and like highest unemployment rate currently, and like all these stats that I didn't even know. So like, why should people give you another chance to run the state? And they had no answer.
Good question.
To that. They couldn't answer. They just ended up attacking each other like personally. And the Republicans were actually able to come out of that debate looking like the ones who were the change agents, looking like the ones who were trying to actually shake up the system, which is exactly why so many people, workers included in particular, have gone over to the right, because it's like, well, screw this. The status quo sucks. My life sucks. I can't buy a house. I can't afford to drive anywhere anymore. I want something new. And all these Democrats are just promising more of the same. Okay, maybe I'll try out the Republicans and see what they have to offer. And if the left doesn't offer something, another alternative, and just continues to chain itself to the
I think that's
Democratic Party,
what's,
it's just going to
if I
sink along
remember
with the
correctly, about the
Democratic
Central
Party, which is
Valley.
already
What's
happening.
interesting is that the DSA there, they do work in a context where people are not like Democrats or Republicans, and people are more independent or whatever, and are more open,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like the Bay or LA, which are more Democratic Party run, whatever. Yeah. I think it was maybe in your resolution,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
some
exactly.
YDSA branches supported the Vote Socialist slate, or at least Ramsey, correct?
Yeah, that's right. The UC Berkeley YDSA endorsed all of the Vote Socialist slate except for Alice Steck, who's running for lieutenant governor, because they endorsed Oliver Ma, who's the DSA member candidate. But we thought that was a really good sign. And we also used that in our resolution to say, like, look, like the college students within our chapter can see what's happening here. And they're drawing this line, the crooked line, right? With Ma. But yeah, we should be taking the lead from them. And then the Pasadena Community College YDSA endorsed
Yeah.
Robinson, but not the rest of the slate. But yeah, that was a good sign. So there's definitely differences there, and there's definitely cracks. And that's what we want to do. We want to like seek out those divisions and actually, give the left of the DSA some backbone to show that it's actually not impossible to challenge the right wing on these questions and fight for a clean break. There's actually resonance for that. You actually have to do it. You actually have to push
Right.
for it.
It's not just going to be an automatic process or a process that happens over some timetable with, a bunch of metrics dreamed up by these dirty break caucuses in the DSA. Like, you got to get 30% of the Democrat, whatever. That's never going to happen. Fight has to start now, or it's not going to start at all.
Yeah. And it has to be along programmatic lines, because that's the other thing about like the whole discussion about the Steyer endorsement. It just very quickly devolved into how undemocratic the California DSA
Right,
was
of
as a
course.
body.
Of
It's not
course.
representative, and we need to have more consultation
We
with
need
the
more commissions and
chapters.
committees. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
no, that's not
let's have a
what's happening
debate
here. It's a
over
programmatic
actually
fight that needs to be
endorsing
had,
a
not a
working
fight
class
over like.
alternative and not the Democrats. Let's have that debate at a meeting. And whereas what they do is they're not going to quote endorse anyone, and then they're going to put out a voter guide with an essential an endorsement, but they're not going to have a fight about it at a meeting. So that's like pretty undemocratic. That's true. But why?
Yeah.
Why are they functioning that way? And they can get away with it because the left and the DSA isn't fighting it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. One thing I did want to say about Steyer before we move on is like, it was such a cartoonish position, right? That like the DSA would endorse this billionaire who has all these progressive talking points, and everybody could see right through it. But it was actually the logical conclusion of a program which says that you have to vote for the most viable candidate to try and like reform the capitalist system. And so, that's how they ended up there. And it's like, okay, so what should we be doing? Should we be supporting Steyer, the billionaire? No. Okay, well, why not? Well, because he's a billionaire. He obviously doesn't believe any of this stuff. He's obviously not going to make any real change for working people because he's a billionaire. He's made all his money off of these complexes, whatever. It's like, okay, well, let's take that logic and then move it backwards in the other direction. If it's wrong to support Steyer because he's not actually going to represent the interest of the working class and the working people because he's a billionaire, it's also the same thing to support someone who's a member of the billionaires party, the Democratic Party, that is committed to defending the rule of the billionaires. So our duty as socialists, just as our duty as socialists is to expose Steyer because he's not actually going to represent their interests, it's also our duty to expose all the other people who are running under his
So
party,
like there's not
who are
a
doing the same
fundamental
thing just without
difference
his billions of
between
dollars.
the billionaire and somebody like AOC or this guy that just won in Philly, Chris Robb, who are not billionaires and are DSA members, I guess, but they're Democrats. They're running as Democrats. They get into office and they are Democrats. The Steyer thing is just so kind of out there that it's very easy for DSAers, especially who are not in California, can talk a lot of crap about that. But they're pushing essentially the same program, but, with a more, quote, socialist veneer. Right.
Yeah, or Mamdani
Right.
is not
He
a
just
billionaire.
does
He
all
just
these
meets behind
deals in
closed
the
doors
interests
with a
of the real
billionaire club
estate
that runs New
interests,
York.
and yeah. Yeah. We get
Right.
enough. The
Privatize public
DSA is full
housing,
of
all of that.
caucuses
Right.
that call
Exactly.
themselves Marxist. And one of them, is, which we talked about in our last episode, is the Marxist Unity Group. And they can write very orthodox sounding articles and statements. They're opposed to a clean break. And they say that running on the Democratic line is basically like a tactical question. And in their perspectives document, they say that the clean break places primacy on the ballot line, not program or party organization, as the key distinction. And so basically they're arguing that like the Democratic Party ballot line does not represent a party or a program, which of course is like ludicrous. We've already seen this over and over. But then more recently, they were really gaga over Democrat Chris Rob's win in Philadelphia. And they said that all DSA candidates should follow Chris Rob's lead, run as open socialists on a slate with other DSA candidates, and refuse discipline from the Democrats. And, you know, of course, like Rob's first event after winning last night was sponsored by the Justice Democrats, and it was called How to Take Over the Democratic Party. So it just really speaks to the point you were making. Like, he's for free Palestine, he's against ICE, he's all these things.
Sure.
But he's, you know, running and representing literally the party of genocide. And that's what they're trying to, quote, take over. It's the billionaires' party. I think that's an important point, that it actually does more damage when it's a more left-sounding representative, because for people who are really sick of the Democrats.
Yeah. And it's also just so ridiculous on its face. Like, okay, so if you're insisting that they don't align themselves with the Democratic Party leadership, you know, they don't take marching orders from the Democrats, they don't subject themselves to Democratic Party discipline. Okay, they're not supposed to accept money from the super PACs. Then, like, what's the reason? Okay, the reason is that no one would even consider voting for somebody other than a Democrat. Okay, well, in 2026, that's really a ridiculous argument to make. I mean, like, okay, sure, people still have plenty of illusions in the Democrats. I'm not going to say they don't, but they're widely hated. If there was any time to strike out on your own and distance yourself from these guys, it's now. It's just a really bad argument. It's just tying yourself to this sinking ship. And then on the like ballot access stuff, that like falls apart too. And we put in the resolution about Oliver Ma, like this is an open primary. You don't have to declare for a party in order to run in this election in California right now. But Oliver Ma, the DSA member candidate for lieutenant governor, decided to put himself down as a Democrat. He can say he's for Palestine and all this other stuff, but he's chosen to affiliate himself with this party of genocide when he doesn't have to in order to get on the ballot and get a hearing for his politics.
The idea that there's no discipline, that you can just do whatever you want and use the Democratic Party ballot line is absolutely ridiculous. If that were the case, then why is every single DSA elected capitulate to Zionism the minute there's any kind of pressure put on them? Right? I mean, Mamdani, AOC, you know, everybody, you know, this is a red line for the Democratic Party. That's just one of them. There's more than just that. But like, the reality is the Democrats control their ballot line. All these people who join it and they run for higher office, they have to sacrifice whatever made them popular, because to move up in the party, they've got to do what the billionaires who control the party say they have to do. There's a really good quote actually from Marx, which everyone in the DSA is very fond of, I'm sure, from his address to the Central Committee of the Communist League in 1850. I think this kind of speaks to that argument, you know, that argument about, well, if we don't vote for the Democrats, then there maybe two Republicans are going to be running against each other, right? Marx says, even when there is no prospect of achieving their election, the workers must put up their own candidates to preserve their independence, gauge their strength, and bring their revolutionary position and party standpoint to public attention. They must not be led astray by empty phrases of the Democrats, who will maintain the workers' candidates will split the Democratic Party and offer the forces of reaction the chance of victory. All such talk means, in the final analysis, the proletariat is to be swindled. The progress which the proletarian party will make by operating independently in this way is infinitely more important than the disadvantages resulting from the presence of a few reactionaries in the representative body. So, yeah, I think that pretty much sums up what's wrong with the DSA approach here on the California
Peace
elections.
and Freedom, Vote Socialist slate. is they are in a unity, I think it's called Left Unity. Right. And so that is a deal not for the governor, but for the other statewide offices
Yeah,
that
left unity slate. Yeah.
where the PSL candidates are not running, they would support Greens and vice versa. And the JBA is not down with this. So maybe you could explain why we call for a vote socialist slate, but say don't vote Green.
Yeah. I mean, we put it very succinctly in the statement that the Green Party is a capitalist party of liberal reform. At the end of the day, their program is to get a bunch of good politicians in office that will enact better policies. And if you look at like Butch Ware, the Green Party candidate for governor's platform, he's very explicit, says like all of my proposals are totally within the current existing law and could be enacted the day that I'm in office. And it's like, okay, so on one hand, it's like you want to show that these things are realistic, but that's their real perspective. They really think that like the existing levers of power are
Right.
totally sufficient to achieve a kind of utopian eco-socialist society, or sometimes some of them like to use the eco-socialist label, but some of them don't. And then if you look at their platforms, first of all, the Vote Socialist slate, they've got a lot of contradictions. And I want to say that our endorsement of them is not a blanket endorsement. We understand that actually they have a lot of liberal politics, and one of the clearest manifestations of this is their support to the Green Party. And on a lot of their platform, there's a lot of overlap in terms of like illusions in electoralism and putting forward like electoral solutions to these problems. But there's still a clear like class line. Like, again, these members of the Vote Socialist slate, they're mostly union members. They really highlight the connection to the working class and the need to mobilize the working class. You look at their Green Party slate and they might mention the
Right.
workers here and there, but that's not their program. That's not their vehicle for advancing the struggle. Class struggle is not their method. Their method is bourgeois electoral reform, and they really think that that's possible and that's the way to go. And it's these kind of liberal politics that have really driven the working class to the right. And so by tying yourself to just a smaller version, a small-time liberal capitalist party instead of like the big leagues, imperialist liberal capitalist party, you're muddying the waters. And so we're
Right.
opposed to this left unity slate. There's also a bit of a contradiction in that this left unity slate does not include the governor's seat, because the PSL, running under the Peace and Freedom Party ticket, refused to drop their candidate. And Butch Ware, the Green Party guy, was like furious about this and just like, I was promised the Peace and Freedom Party endorsement and then they pulled the rug out from under me. It's like, yeah, okay, so like he thought that his like connections with like the party leadership was going to guarantee this endorsement, but the Peace and Freedom Party people said no, that the PSLers said no. And if there's been a lot of like vicious debate, online about this. And what the PSL supporters say,
Right.
look, okay, we think there's a lot of good things that the Greens do and we want to work with them and whatever. But at the end of the day, Ramsey
Yeah.
Robinson is running as a socialist. And he's saying that socialism is actually the way to change society, and Butch Ware is not. So that's why we're going to vote for Ramsey Robinson. And so that's like a contradiction within the PSL that we want to push on too. That's also like part of our, tactic in doing this, is actually to say to the PSL, look, we support the fact that you're running as avowed socialists, drawing a line against the capitalist party, but there's a contradiction there in the fact that you're backing the small-time capitalist Green Party. So what do you think about that? We're actually able to have those kind of debates from within a united front over the necessity of having a working class alternative in these elections. And we think the whole left should be doing that. That should be the perspective of not just the DSA, not just PSL, but like all the different left groups should be coming together to draw a line, and then from within this kind of united front over this like basic kind of standard to then talk it out. Okay, well, what's the way forward? How do we actually achieve this? We all say we're fighting to overthrow capitalism, we want a socialist revolution. How do we get there? And you can do that a lot more
Yeah, I
effectively
think there
from
was
within
a
that
comment
united
on
front
Twitter
perspective, rather
by
than this
a
like
Green
sectarianism.
person. I forgot what their handle was, but they were like very outraged that we were saying that the Greens were a capitalist. And and they were like, "Oh, we're socialists." And then they
People
like
for a
sent
green movement.
a link to their program. And then if you look at the program, one of the main sections is called Curbing Corporate Power. It's like curb your capitalism. It says Greens want to reduce the economic and political power of large corporations and redesign corporations to serve our society, democracy, and environment. And then it says we must change the legal design of corporations so that they generate profits, but not at the expense of the environment, human rights, workers, communities, all that. So it's very explicitly a program for a nicer capitalism, a little reduction in the level of exploitation. It is not a program to get rid of capitalism. And it's definitely not putting forward that workers should run things. People for Green Movement, they like a lot of the JBA posts that we do. And they said that we were the reason they joined the DSA to fight inside, against the Democrats. But our point is not just for any third party as an alternative. We're Marxists, we're socialists, and we want a working class alternative. And that is the basis upon which we give support, which again, it's not uncritical. Yeah.
Ramsey Robinson, he campaigned in favor of Prop 50, which was really productive to his own campaign, right? That was the California gerrymandering bill to squeeze, I think it was 4 extra seats for the Democrats out of it by cracking rural districts like, the North Central Valley and merging them with these like liberal metropolitan areas to basically make sure that those voters don't have any kind of effective voice in Congress. And like, what was the whole idea was like, okay, to fight Trump, we need more Democrats. That was like the entire argument. And so if you're running a campaign saying that we need to break with the Democratic Party, we need a workers' party, but then you're also supporting this proposition which says that the answer to fighting Trump is electing more Democrats, that's just totally undermining your own message and the line that you're trying to draw. It's a real contradiction for Ramsey Robinson and the PSL. And then the other thing is I think their position on the trade union leadership. There was one example. There was this AFSCME strike. The UC workers who perform like the lowest paid jobs in the UC, like the janitors and maintenance workers and the maintenance and tech workers in the really big medical centers that make lots of money, living in their cars and poverty wages and all this kind of stuff. And they were going to go on this like unlimited strike, and then the leadership just like canceled it hours before it was supposed to start, and then accepted this contract offer, which was just like really rotten. The members were like very upset about it. It was like clearly a capitulation. And Ramsey Robinson posted immediately afterwards, like, we congratulate AFSCME on their great victory, in their fight against the UC. It's like, no, it was not a great victory. Socialists need to be putting forward an alternative leadership of the unions, which is something they're not doing.
In Chicago, you have the bill into Byron Sigcho Lopez. And for people who don't know, Byron Sigcho Lopez is a DSA member who has been on the Chicago City Council for a few years now. He is also a member of the Democratic Party Central Committee for Cook County, the old Daily Machine in its current form. But the basic way that the left is sort of lining up behind the Sigcho Lopez campaign with DSA and PSL is that Sigcho Lopez is running for Congress as an independent because he got boxed out of the Democratic primary by Chuy Garcia, who's retiring, and he retired in such a way that the primary that followed would ensure his chief of staff would automatically get the nomination. Like, he'd said he was going to retire like a day before the filing deadline or whatever. So Sigcho Lopez is running as an independent. DSA here is making a huge deal of it. Like, if you look at the Chicago DSA calendar, it's like every day there's like a canvassing for Byron event. And yeah, PSL just fell right into this. They had Claudia come here. Claudia from the 2024 presidential campaign couldn't do an event in support of Byron Sigcho Lopez. We've been pushing to endorse Ed Hershey from the Working Class Party, who's running an independent working class campaign in the same district. Now, it's sort of the same kind of arguments that I hear from you, Max. Like, Sigcho Lopez is the only viable candidate. Plus, everyone pretends he's actually an independent when the guy is on the Democratic Party Central Committee.
And want an actual working class alternative to have candidates that we can canvass for and support and try to show that it is actually possible to do electoral politics, whatever, but for a different purpose. Our purpose is not trying to get the most, quote, viable candidate. It's to actually raise consciousness of the need to fight against this whole capitalist system. There's a lot of other elections that we're supporting coming up in other states. And so we will have future episodes on how people can get involved with those campaigns. But yes, definitely get out there on June 2nd and vote socialist. That's, what everyone listening should be part of. We encourage anyone listening, whether you love what we're saying, hate what we're saying, you should subscribe, let us know. Especially if you hate what we're saying and you're in the DSA in another caucus, please, we'd love to have you on and debate these questions, because we actually think this is like a pretty fundamental debate over how to actually advance the working class struggle in this country and the fight for a socialist party. So please get in touch, like us, follow, subscribe, all that stuff.
So you can follow us on Twitter at Clean Break Now, on Instagram at DSA_JustBreakAlready. And our link tree is also linktree.com/DSA_JustBreakAlready, where you can find all of our statements. All right. Bye.